When you think of the British Empire, what comes to mind? Probably those red-coated soldiers, right? Or massive ships ruling the waves. We're all taught that it was discipline and sheer military genius that built the largest empire in history. But what if I told you that's only half the story? That underneath it all, there was this hidden engine, a revolutionary financial machine that paid for the whole thing. So let's get into how that machine actually worked.
This quote right here really hits the nail on the head. You see, the British Empire wasn't just a military project. At its very core, it was a financial one. It pioneered these incredible new economic tools, things like national debt and corporate monopolies, that let a tiny island nation consistently outspend and outmaneuver its much bigger rivals. This is the story of how dark money, in a way, built an empire.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, we'll look at how all that glory was really built on capital. Then we'll see how conquest was basically outsourced to a private company. After that, we have to confront the brutal, painful sources of profit that fueled this system. And finally, we'll connect the dots and see the enduring blueprint these tools left on the world we live in today. Okay, let's start at the very beginning with the foundation of it all: debt. Before Britain could rule the waves, it had to figure out a much bigger problem: how to pay for all those ships. And the solution they came up with, well, it wasn't just clever, it completely changed the game for how nations fight wars and build empires. So, we all know the schoolbook version of the story, right? Naval power, incredible discipline, constant innovation. But running right alongside that, there was this other story, the financial engine. And this slide shows that contrast perfectly. The schoolbook version isn't wrong, not at all. It's just incomplete. It leaves out the whole machinery of debt, monopolies, and exploitation that made it all possible. The real power wasn't just in the canon, it was in the ledger book. So here it is, the core innovation. Picture this. It's 1694, and England is basically broke from fighting constant wars with France. So what do? They create the Bank of England. But this wasn't just a bank. No, it was a machine designed to turn the country's future tax revenues into a kind of mortgage. For the very first time, a government could create money from debt, not just from the gold it had in its vaults. It could fund its massive ambitions on credit, borrowing from its own wealthy citizens, who, in return, were promised a nice, steady profit, all guaranteed by the state. It was genius. And this move created this incredibly powerful, self-feeding loop. It worked like this. The crown needs cash for ships and soldiers, so the Bank of England sells government bonds, basically fancy IOUs, to private investors, raising huge amounts of money. With that cash, Britain builds a navy that can dominate anyone. And here's the kicker. As the empire expands, the profits from trade flow back to London, making sure those investors get paid back, with interest. War and conquest literally became a profitable investment, a kind of public-private partnership in empire building. Okay, now for the next piece of the puzzle, the privatization of conquest. If debt was the fuel for this imperial engine, then the vehicle was something truly new, a private company that completely blurred the line between a business and a sovereign nation. The East India Company. Honestly, this might be the single most powerful corporation in all of human history. It was founded way back in 1600 as a simple trading company, but it grew into an absolute financial and military monster. You have to remember this was a private business with shareholders in London that was acting like an unofficial arm of the British government. It was so powerful, it even minted its own currency. And when I say it was more than a company, I am not exaggerating. This thing raised its own private army, an army that was often bigger than Britain's official one. It signed treaties with kings. It collected taxes from millions of people across India. The profits it made from monopolies on stuff like tea didn't just make its shareholders rich. No, that money was plowed right back into expanding the empire. It was private profit directly funding public power, all while keeping the crown at a convenient arm's length. All right, now we have to get to the darkest part of this story. We have to be honest about where a lot of this capital actually came from. Because the financial bloodstream of the empire, it was pumped full of wealth that was extracted through just unimaginable human suffering. And this wasn't some unfortunate side effect. It was a calculated economic strategy. For over 2 centuries, the transatlantic slave trade generated wealth on a scale that is just mind-boggling. And if you look at it from a cold, hard financial perspective, the system was brutally efficient. The profits from sugar plantations in the Caribbean, all built on the backs of enslaved people, flowed directly into the heart of the empire, into London's banks, insurance houses, and into the pockets of investors.
This wasn't some dirty little secret. This was foundational capital that financed new industries, grand estates, and even the Royal Navy itself. And if you need one more example of this ruthless mix of state power and corporate greed, look no further than the Opium Wars. So Britain had a problem. The entire country was addicted to Chinese tea, and they were shipping out massive amounts of silver to pay for it, a huge trade imbalance. The East India Company's solution: smuggle opium grown in India into China to get the silver back. When the Chinese government tried to stop this massive drug epidemic, Britain declared war. Twice. They won and forced China to keep its markets open to opium. It was literally state-sponsored narco-trafficking on an imperial scale. So the British Empire is history now. The red has faded from the maps. But, and this is a huge but, the financial architecture it built, the tools it pioneered, the moral compromises it made, those things didn't just disappear. In so many ways, they became the actual blueprint for our modern global economy. Which leads us to a really crucial question. The redcoats are gone, the gunboats are in museums, but had the financial mechanisms of power really changed all that much? Well, let's take a look. When you put them side by side like this, the parallels are pretty striking. Debt-financed warfare? Today we call them sovereign bonds, and they fund massive defense budgets. The East India Company, a corporation acting with the power of a state? Well, today we have global corporations that can influence policy and move markets on a whim. And the extraction of wealth from foreign lands? It's just evolved into these super sophisticated systems of offshore banking and financial secrecy where capital flows silently from the many to the few. The world didn't get rid of the blueprint, it just digitized it. So, we'll end with this thought. The British Empire proved that real power isn't just about controlling territory. It's about controlling the ledger. It's about who gets to create and manage debt, credit, and the flow of capital. The names on that ledger may have changed, the tools are definitely more advanced now, but that fundamental question is still the same. Who gets to write the rules of our global financial system, and who ultimately profits from them?